Hey everyone and welcome to Storytime. My name is Jake and today we are going to be looking at the subreddit r/prorevenge, where people tell us their best stories on when they got revenge on someone or something they didn't like. If you're new around here, please do hit subscribe down below so that you never miss out on another video. But for now, let's sit back, relax and enjoy some pro-revenge stories. Make my life hell at multiple jobs? I'll get you fired. Backstory. In the early 2000s, I worked for Overpriced CD Store. I really liked my job aside from one coworker, Karen. We just didn't get along. I made the best of it, but she was a borderline bully. Of course, she gets promoted to key holder and proceeds to turn into a full-blown power trip bully. She made my life awful, and a job that I previously loved, I couldn't stand anymore. I made a formal complaint that made its way to HR, but I was done working there, which was her goal. Of course, when HR investigated my claims, they found she and the assistant manager were dating. Oops. And she was moved to another store since fraternizing was against policy. Apparently, she didn't like that store and quit. A few months later, I was happily working at Defunct Bookstore. And who gets a job at the Defunct Bookstore at another mall? Karen. Over the next few months, she proceeds to do little things to annoy me, like hanging up when I would call their store for a customer, or leave me on hold forever. Of course, I would get in trouble for not effectively handling the customer with their needs. The revenge. About 6 months into the job, I heard through the grapevine of the store gossip that Karen had been injured in a car accident. Apparently, she had hurt her back and went on medical leave. She couldn't stand for more than 10 minutes at a time without excruciating pain. This is important. She was on indefinite leave, and her store could not hire anyone to replace her while on medical leave, leaving them short-handed. And I knew her manager was really annoyed after a few months. 2 months later, a few friends of mine and I decided to go play pool. A former coworker, Rick, from the Overpriced CD Store was there. Man, too bad you weren't here last night. It would have been a reunion. Karen and assistant manager were here playing pool. Karen was playing pool. Oh yeah, they come in every Wednesday night. Really? That's interesting. Every Wednesday, huh? How long has this been going on? A few months now. Yes, for the entire time she was on medical leave, Karen was out playing pool once a week, not at home in debilitating pain like she claimed. The next day I went to her defunct bookstore and asked to speak to the manager. I told him all about her weekly pool sessions and encouraged him to be at the pool hall the next Wednesday night to catch her in action. That Thursday, she was fired. The last time I saw her, she and her friend were attempting to follow me home from work. I called the police and led them into the police station, where they told her to leave me alone or be arrested. So she stayed away from me after that. Oh, I really hope that store went after her for fraud or something like that, just to, put the icing on the cake. Don't want to pay compensation? Enjoy paying way more in legal fees. A few years ago, my mother ran a rest home business with a lady who had a background in nursing. My mother is an immigrant with barely proficient English, so she was happy for someone to take care of the business side of things, while she managed the people side. Looking after the residents, all elderly Chinese, and dealing with the families. Everything was okay for the first few years, until the business partner slowly revealed herself to be a psychotic woman. My mother wanted the best for the residents, and hired a chef to cook traditional Chinese meals for them. If residents were moved to hospital care, she would still come visit them and bring them food and gifts. The psychotic woman would piggyback on this and pretend the gifts were from her when she never spent a cent. She didn't like spending a lot of money on good quality food, so she started reducing the chef's hours to make her quit. The chef asked for 1 day off a week so she could go to church, and the psychotic woman would deliberately schedule her to work for that day. When the chef complained, the psychotic woman told her, "Why don't you pray to God about it?" We found out later that she was also abusive to some of the residents. She did this selectively, preying on the ones who suffered from dementia and couldn't report her. The chef found her dumping away the vegetables she prepared for one resident and just pouring some vegetable juices on rice instead. When she criticized Psychotic Woman about this, she was made redundant. Fortunately, she was able to make an employment claim and received compensation. The Psychotic Woman's own mother was also a resident there until her dementia worsened and she was moved to hospital care. She was physically and verbally abusive to her own mother, often yelling at her to hurry up and just pass away. She was also taking money out of the business account for maintenance and never providing any receipts for work done. It looked like she was trying to polish the place up before pushing my mother out of the business, as she refused to sell to other buyers and offered to buy my mother's share at a way lower price than what others were prepared to pay. A lot of the staff were Chinese students, and Psychotic Woman knew she could bully them without repercussion. Anyone who disagreed with her would get moved to the graveyard shift or let go. People would eventually quit because of the bullying, and she quickly ran out of competent staff, so she started letting untrained staff administer medication and unlicensed staff drive residents to doctor's appointments. My mother freaked out when she found out about this, and reported her to the health board. The Psychotic Woman received a letter from the board asking her to respond to the complaint. She immediately went and found herself a lawyer, who I will kindly refer to as Greedy Hag. Greedy Hag advised Psychotic Woman that the best way to get rid of this problem was to remove my mother as director. She sought to rely on legislation without first reviewing any of the company documents. If she had read the shareholders' agreement, she would have realized that even though Psychotic Woman had 60% of the shareholding, she needed 80% to remove my mother. So, out of nowhere, my mother receives an email from the Psychotic Woman, inviting her to attend a meeting to have herself removed as a director. She then sees through the company's bank account that money had been paid to Greedy Hag. It seemed like she was paying to have herself fired. She doesn't know at this point that none of this was allowed, and calls me in a panic. I tell her to lawyer up, and we write to Greedy Hag, advising her that as this was a shareholders' dispute matter, and seeing as she was acting for Psychotic Woman, she couldn't bill the company for her time. Greedy Hag writes back to us, saying she doesn't represent Psychotic Woman, she's only acting in the best interests of the company, and will continue acting for the company. This goes back and forth for an excruciatingly long period. They start to accuse my mother of verbally harassing Psychotic Woman and creating a hostile environment for the staff and residents. Basically turning the entire story around and blaming everything on my mother. They referred to my mother's complaint as exceptionally minor issues, isolated incidents that somehow paradoxically created an existential threat to the company. You know, Schrodinger's complaint. It was clear that our protests would not be enough, and Greedy Hag continued to bill fees to the company. So, we lodged a complaint to the Law Society. Our complaint was 1 paragraph long. The lawyer's response, over 200 pages. It was obvious that she wanted to bury us in paperwork, and she continued to emphasize in her response what a terribly incompetent director my mother was, and how Psychotic Woman was the victim of my mother's destructive attempt to harm the company, and the company desperately required her counsel to protect its interests. What Psychotic Woman didn't know at this point was that I am also a lawyer. Mind you, I don't do litigation, and we hired separate counsel to deal with the actual dispute. Most of what I do is pointless paper shuffling bureaucracy, but like all lawyers, I can be petty. So, I spent weeks painstakingly sifting through all her nonsense, helping my mother respond to every unfounded allegation and throwing shade at every opportunity. The committee agreed with us, describing her explanations as disingenuous, irreconcilable with evidence, implausible, completely nonsensical, underhanded, misleading, and extremely concerning from a professional standards perspective. They said Greedy Hag was hopelessly conflicted in her dealings and was absolutely scathing in their deliberation. It was beautiful. Greedy Hag was ordered to pay a small fine, costs, and $2,500 compensation. She appealed this decision, presumably because she has numerous complaints against her already and can't risk another strike of unsatisfactory conduct, and hired the most expensive barrister she could, someone who used to sit on the committee and prosecuted on legal disciplinary cases. The slightly depressing part is, she managed to get the decision overturned, although everyone who has read it called it incomprehensible and reeking of bribery. They reasoned that the lawyer wasn't responsible for issuing paperwork to remove my mother as director, because Psychotic Woman wrote my mother's name in, and that happened after she left the office, so it had nothing to do with the lawyers. Flawless logic. The consolation is that her legal fees must have ended up somewhere around $30,000, as I forced her legal team to read pages and pages of insults, describing her legal advice as not worth the paper it was printed on. Oh, and P.S. all the staff members fired by Psychotic Woman showed up to support my mother, forcing her to settle as the alternative was to sell to a third party. It was very satisfying to watch her cry as we walked out of her arbitration. Yeah, I've got to agree with the top comment here, that wasn't as satisfying as we would have wanted it to be, but it was still good in the fact that she wasn't able to screw her mother over royally like she was hoping to. So hopefully karma gets her one day. Make my life at work miserable? You'll never work again with me. I used to work at a medium-sized IT services company and had recently been moved to a smaller branch office with a nice pay raise. I was basically my own team and got to do interesting work on a large project. Since they were satisfied with the work but needed it done in a larger scale, the company hired another person to help me. Meet Fred. I knew Fred from outside work through common relationships, and I didn't find him any weirder than other nerdy people in the business. Oh boy. Fred was good at technical work. Very good. When it came to human interactions though, it was something else. Fred thought of me as his only friend in the workplace and would whine all day long about all the other colleagues, who were equally incompetent, weird, evil, and generally deserving of his scorn. Fred had a terrible tendency of telling other people we had to work with that they were doing things wrong, and that their software was bad, which was often technically right, but completely forgetting the constraints in which other people had to work, and that there might have been reasons for things that now sounded awful, which is basically always the case in IT. People resented both of us as a team for things he said, and some situations became entrenched. It was getting harder every day for me to get to work. Eventually, he made a lot of enemies, and he got a meeting with the division director. It only lasted for a few minutes, during which he told the boss of 800 people that he was an evildoer. It was his last day in the company. I worked alone from that time and managed to finish most of the project, soothing things over with the other teams. A few months later, I got an offer for the job of my dreams in a huge utility company. After starting the work, guess who I discover working right here as a contractor under my direct supervision? Fred. Fred looked so happy to find a friend again. He spent most of my first day at work telling me how the company was awful, everyone was dumb, and everything was insufferable. I went home that night feeling horrible, wondering how much of what he told me was true and how bad it would have been to work there. Turns out, after a few hard starting days, it really was the job of my dreams. Acting now with Fred as a client and not a colleague, I managed to keep him in check and to improve a lot of the perceived quality of the team's work. Prior to my hiring, Fred was basically telling people to screw off whenever they were asking him things he didn't want to work on. Having someone who could see through his BS to manage him got the roadmap back on track. Eventually, I learned that my colleagues had been very wary about working with me at the beginning, because Fred had been bad-mouthing me from the day he learned I had been hired to manage him. This had made the first weeks difficult until they understood he had been lying about it all. About 2 years later, I was now team manager, and my boss comes into my office and asks me about a hiring issue. There's a new position in the team, and the recruiter asked him about someone with excellent technical skills, but who sounded very arrogant. Guess who wanted to work as my colleague again? If you followed the story, you've got it right. I did not let out to my boss the slightest bit of resentment. I explained to him how he was a very competent person, but that he might just lack a bit of the skills required for our company's teamwork. I knew exactly what I had to say for my boss to never want to hire him, ever, without making it about our personal history. I only told what happened to a close coworker, and he sounded very thankful to hear that he would not have to work with Fred as a colleague. A few months later, his company lost the contract and Fred was hired by the new contractor. However, they were not as lenient with him as the previous company was, and about a few months later, I was finally Fred free. Last I heard of him, he was working at a Silicon Valley's giants on a project that was in a worldwide media mess over technical issues. I kept wondering whether he was telling everyone else in his team how bad at a job they were and how much he contributed to that massive failure. There's like a subreddit called r/IamVerySmart, and I can just imagine Fred being on there, just saying how everyone else is so below him and he's the only one that understands anything. Hey everyone, I hope you all had a really good day and that you enjoyed that video. If you want to check out some other videos, then click on screen right now, or check out the playlist down below. If you enjoyed that video, then please do leave a like, and if you want to submit your own stories, then you can do so by joining the Discord in the top link in the description. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon.